Hey, 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 time for another out of this world story from our story. When your newborn's hair color makes you question everything, it's not just the baby blues that keep you up at night. Today on our story, is that a hint of red or just the nursery? Lighting playing tricks? Took a paternity test after newborn's hair color made me suspicious. I made sure wife didn't get what she wanted. I, 26 male, and my wife Rachel, 25 female, have been married for only 2 years, so we really classify ourselves as being quite a young couple. We haven't had any real challenges as a couple yet, and I thought we were doing all right. We even just had a baby recently. When I found out we were having a boy, I was ecstatic. My dad sucked, and I always took him as an example of how not to be a father. So I was looking forward to being the best dad I could possibly be for this kid. But the moment I saw him, I had doubts, and it sucks how much that ruined what should have been a perfect day for me. For context, you'll need to know a bit about me, and my wife's families. I'm the palest ginger you've ever seen with bright red hair. I mean, true ginger, like I burn on a cloudy day. My wife is blonde and blue-eyed. And our baby came out with black hair and brown eyes. As soon as I saw him, I felt doubt. But the happiness of the moment stomped those feelings down. But over the next few days, I realized I still had questions nagging at the back of my mind. My son didn't look like me at all. I know most newborns look like angry potatoes, but I could at least see some similarities to his mom. He had her dimples, and it looked like they had the same nose. I couldn't see even a minor resemblance tome. But what really got me was the hair. I'm no biologist, and I know that hair color genetics aren't straightforward, but I didn't see any way my son could have black hair. I even remember asking a doctor friend in case I was missing something. There are a few other redheads in my immediate family, but most of us have brown hair. The only black hair in my family comes from some-in-laws and their children, and my wife's family is almost exclusively blonde and dirty blonde, while her dad has brown hair. I used to joke that they all looked like a Viking army. No matter how much research I did, I couldn't make sense of the fact that my son had black hair. Of course, I knew genetics can be weird, but there's a chance that some black-haired ancestors' genes had just decided to make an appearance now. But I wasn't going to count on that, so I took matters into my own hands and decided to take a paternity test. That felt like some kind of betrayal, but I didn't have a choice. The uncertainty was killing me, and it was starting to affect my wife, too. She noticed that I wasn't happy, and sometimes I even seemed reluctant to carry or play with her son. I convinced myself that a paternity test was the best thing for all of us. If I was wrong, then my mind would be at ease and everything could go back to normal. I'd just carry a bit of guilt with myself for a while, but as long as she didn't know, I'd get over it. And if I was right and my son wasn't really my son, well, I'd deal with that if it came to that. So I got a home paternity test. I had to go to a pharmacy myself to pick one up. I didn't want to order it online and run the risk of my wife finding it before me. The pharmacy tests are pretty cheap and nearly 100% accurate. They can be used in court, but that was getting ahead of myself. First, I needed to find out if the boy was actually mine. It was pretty easy to get some time alone with him to run the test. I just volunteered to watch him while Rachel took a nap. She was more than happy to agree to that. If you've ever taken care of a newborn, then you'll understand that I'm not exaggerating when I say that she fell asleep in less than 5 minutes. Once she was asleep, I got the test out and used the swabs to collect the DNA. I packaged everything up carefully and put the baby in a carrier. Then I dipped out to mail the package. I was worried that Rachel would wake up before I got home, and I was prepared to tell her that I'd gone for a walk, but she was still fast asleep. The wait for the results was agony. I tried hard not to let myself get attached to the baby. In my mind, I never referred to him as my son, just to soften the blow if the results came back as I feared. The whole time, Rachel was worried about how disconnected I was starting to become. She was even worried that I might be depressed. I just lied and told her that I was exhausted from work and the new baby. She seemed to consider that an acceptable explanation. I felt bad for lying to her, but I couldn't tell her the truth just yet. Women don't take kindly to the idea of paternity tests. It took about a week for the email to come in. I locked myself in the bathroom to read it, and I still hesitated for a long time before I could work up the nerve to open it, not the biological father. It felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. For a moment, I tried to convince myself that it had to be a mistake. Maybe I'd contaminated the sample. It was possible I did it wrong. I'm not a doctor or something like that, right? But I know I was just making excuses. I'd been as careful as I could possibly be, and I'm a careful guy. Up until a year ago, I used to assemble model plane kits. I could follow directions. It definitely wasn't a mistake from my end. Besides, I'd always known from the beginning. The doubt I'd had from the moment I saw him had just turned into something real. It was sickening because I wanted this to be wrong. I wanted him to be my kid. I wanted to raise him. I already loved that little baby, but he wasn't mine, and I couldn't do that to myself. It took me a while to recover from that. I sat in that bathroom for about 30 minutes before Rachel came looking for me. She knocked on door and asked if I was okay. I told her I wasn't. I opened the door and showed her the test results. All I said was, "He's not mine." She went pale and stood silent for a while. When she gathered herself, she surprised me by asking how I could even think of taking a paternity test. She started ranting about trust and everything she'd gone through in carrying the baby. But I snapped at her. I told her to shut up. She blinked at me like I slapped her. I'd never spoken to her like that, but I wasn't going to stand there and let her make me feel guilty for being lied to. I told her not to test my patience. I'd had my suspicions from the moment I saw him, and I decided to find out the truth. Hirie's watered like she was about to start crying. I thought she was going to admit the truth, but she just said, there was probably a mistake. The way she said it, with her voice quivering and tears streaming down her face, almost made me believe her. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't let myself be fooled. I told her to stop lying to me and just give me the truth for once. She was silent for a while, and then she walked into the living room and collapsed into a chair. She covered her face while she sobbed for a moment and then said, "Don't hate me." I felt my heart sink. So it was true. Don't hate her. It was too late for that. All the happiness I had had after the birth was gone because of her. She sobbed for another minute before she continued. She claimed it was a one-time thing, a single mistake that never happened again. She said she got drunk during her friend's bachelorette party and didn't realize when she ended up sleeping with another guy. She said she didn't even get his name. I didn't know whether to believe her or not, a one-time thing that led to her getting pregnant. And she didn't know who the biod was. That sounded a little too convenient. But I also realized that it didn't matter. That image had already been done. She tried to pass off another man's kid as my own. I didn't even care who he was. That was her problem. My problem was getting Rachel out of my life. Rachel was still sobbing noisily, and it irritated me to no end. Why was she crying as if she was the one who was hurting here? At least she still had a son. I felt like I'd lost a child I'd never even had. I loved him so much. And now I had to get used to the fact that I couldn't raise him. He wasn't my son. I wasn't going to spend my life taking care of someone else's child. I asked Rachel if she realized what she'd done to me. I told her she hadn't just cheated on me, she'd broken my heart. I asked her how she could do this to me. How could she knowingly pass off someone else's child as my own? She stopped sobbing long enough to give a coherent response. She said she regretted her mistake and she was terrified when she found out she was pregnant. But she said she had been hopeful that he was mine, because the timing was right for me to be the father. She claimed that she had cried and prayed every day that the child was mine. She kept rattling on about prayer, hopes, and dreams, and I stopped listening. What was the point? Nothing, she said, was going to change their reality. I just asked her if she had ever been planning to tell me. She hesitated for a moment and looked away from me. Of course, she wasn't going to. If he had looked a bit like me, or if I'd swallowed my suspicions, then I never would have found out. If I had just been a little more trusting, then she would have gone on pretending, and I would keep living a lie. I would have raised that kid thinking he was mine. And she would have been right at my side, knowing the full truth, that the boy was supposedly the son of some guy who she didn't even know. That was ridiculous. I told her I needed some story. I packed a bag and left the house within an hour. I told my brother everything that happened, and he let me crash at his place. I didn't just leave the house to be away from Rachel. As heartless as it sounds, I needed Toby away from the baby too. Whenever I thought of how he would smile at me or fall asleep in my arms, I'd feel a pain in my chest. Despite my best efforts, I'd still bonded with him. It was only natural. Now I was going to lose him, and the pain was too much to bear. and it was all Rachel's fault. Over the next few days, I stayed with my brother. I avoided contact with Rachel despite the fact that she was calling me constantly. I didn't want to hear her voice. I didn't want to hear the baby's voice either. I needed to insulate myself from them to give myself the chance to heal from what she'd done. That was the only way I'd be able to move on and do what needs to be done next. It hasn't been easy. Being away from him hurts, though. Reminding myself that I'm not his father helps somewhat. I'm giving myself another week to pull myself together, and then I'll get to work on filing for divorce. You wanted to be the best dad you could be, and instead you're stuck questioning everything about your family and your marriage. The way you handled the paternity test was probably the only way to get some peace of mind, even if it hurt like hell. Honestly, your wife's explanation sounded like damage control at best, and a whole lot of mess at worst. A one-time mistake that leads to a kid whose dad she can't even name. That's embarrassing. Update. It's been quite a while since my last update, and I thought it was important to let you guys know how everything is turning out. There was a lot of interest in my original post. The first thing to point out is that it didn't really get easier. Somebody suggested that I should stop thinking of him as my baby and start thinking of him as her baby. That was very hard at first, but I have to admit that it helped in the long run. It made it possible to think more objectively about the situation. Rachel wasn't ready to make things easy for me, though. She kept trying to get in touch with me through phone calls and text messages. Her texts were desperate. She was pleading with me to come back home and help her raise her baby. She said she didn't care what DNA said. To her, I was the father. I was the man who had cared for him and nurtured him. I was the one who picked out his name. That made me the father no matter what science said. That got on my nerves. She was really trying to lecture me about responsibility after knowingly committing paternity fraud. I saw her act for what it was. She didn't just want to end up a single mom. She really had no idea who the father was. Or maybe he was some bum who wouldn't be able to help in any meaningful way. Either way, she was flat out of luck because I wasn't going to play a substitute dad. I filed for divorce 2 weeks after I moved out. I would have done it sooner, but I was so distraught by what she'd done that I needed to give myself some time to calm down and think straight. In theme and time, I had a lawyer ready to help me with the whole process. One of my main concerns was child support. I know child support laws can be downright ridiculous, and I was worried that she would try to put me on the hook for a kid that wasn't mine. He told me it was certainly possible, but only if I'd been legally acting as the child's father. I had but one thing I hadn't done was sign the birth certificate. When I first started having doubts about whether the child was mine, I decided not to sign the birth certificate right away. I made excuses and never got around to it. And eventually, Rachel had stopped asking me about it, so I wasn't the child's father legally and biologically, but my lawyer assured me I wasn't completely in the clear. He reminded me that it was ultimately up to the court, and he'd do his best to make sure they came to a sensible decision. Rachel moved on from texting and calling and started showing up in person. She figured out that I was staying with my brother, and she showed up at his door on multiple occasions. Whenever let her in. We didn't even talk to her. She would always leave eventually, but the last time she sat on the porch for 3 hours with the baby in her arms. Maybe she wanted to win me over by showing me my son. She only left when my brother called the cops to remove her. She didn't show up at the house again after that. When the divorce proceedings started, she said she wanted mediation. She believed we could work through things amicably and choose what was best for the baby. I reminded her that the baby wasn't mine. She wanted child support, and I would rather piss on electric fence than pay her any child support. So mediation was off the table. That didn't stop her from trying to get child support. But by then, we had a court-ordered paternity test. Their results were the same as before, which surprisingly hurt all over again. But with a negative paternity test and no birth certificate, I had no obligation to her baby. The rest of the divorce went by quick. Child was the only issue we really had any conflict over. We didn't have many assets to fight over, we didn't have any pets, and we rent a door apartment, which she got to keep. I didn't mind that she got to keep it because I'd already been planning on moving out of the city. I needed a change of pace, and I felt like there was nothing here for me anymore. It was only going to hurt if I stuck around, and I loved the city too. This woman was there, and my whole life changed for the worst. Besides, the apartment was too big. We moved in there when she got pregnant because we wanted Story 4 kids. Now she'd be living there alone with a child. I knew I wouldn't be able to pay rent in that place alone. She would definitely need to drop it now that she had a child to support on her own. And maybe she'd finally track down the father of her baby and figure out a plan for funding. I was glad that I won the child support battle, but there was the issue of alimony as well. Just like child support, I fought tooth and nail not to pay her a dime. The idea of sending this woman money after what she'd done to me made me furious. Unfortunately, the judge decided that I would have to pay spousal support until she went back to work, but the silver lining was the amount. I'm pretty sure it was the paternity test that made the judge award her such a pathetic amount of alimony. I almost burst out laughing as soon as I heard how much I had to pay. The real show was Rachel's face, though. She looked miserable. Nothing was turning out the way she wanted it to, and I loved it. The whole situation was horrible, but she was the one who'd sunk us all into it. It was nice to see her upset for a change. Rachel was sore about the child support, though. It turned out she'd be telling anyone who cared to listen that I'd abandoned her and the baby. I found out when I got Avery. Angry call from her mother. She asked me what kind of man I was, abandoning a mom and her newborn. So, I didn't cover for Rachel. I told her Moman the truth. Her grandson wasn't my son. He had another dad, and she had no idea who he was because that was the kind of promiscuous life that her daughter was living. Rachel's mom was horrified to hear that. It was more than I needed to say, but it drove the point home. She ended the call immediately, and I could bet that she was going to give Rachel an earful. I don't keep in touch with her anymore, but my brother keeps me updated. He said she's struggling to adapt to being a single mother. She's always reaching out to friends, either for money or to see if they could help her babysit. She wasn't adjusting well to her new reality. I try not to think about her baby. There was still some nights when I would lie awake and think of how things could have turned out if Rachel hadn't made her mistake and doomed the three of us. But most nights, I sleep pretty well knowing that I dodged a massive bullet. I had a hunch, acted on it, and took control of my life before I ended up trapped raising someone else's child. And now Rachel is a single mother who is about to see just how tough life can be when you take a good thing for granted. Rachel sounds like she made things really hard, but you set solid boundaries and didn't let her drag you back in, which is huge. It's wild how she tried everything from texting to showing up to your brother's place. The legal stuff sounds like a headache. But good on you for having a lawyer and making sure you weren't stuck paying for a kid that's not yours. That small alimony payment sounds like a bit of a win too, all things considered. What would you have done? Let us know in the comments below. And thank you for joining us today on our story. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you next time.